connection that can't be parted.
Paul and Barnabas were not only preaching with boldness, they were, with God's help, performing signs and wonders that caused those that opposed the gospel to fear and respect them. In this lesson, we are not told that Paul and Barnabas went to a synagogue in Lystra, even though that was their customary acts. It seems that Paul and Barnabas were engaged in street preaching, ministering to Gentiles, pure pagans. A lame man was sitting nearby the preaching, and he heard the preaching of Paul, and his face must have manifested not only a keen interest, but faith. Paul, knowing that with the Spirit he had the power to heal the man, and that the man had faith, commanded the man to stand up and walk. The man leaped up and began to walk, following after Paul and Barnabas and testifying to what had happened through their hands. Paul and Barnabas were, however, in heathen territory. The pagans' crowd was indeed enthusiastic, and in their excitement they began to speak in the Lystra language, a tongue that was unknown or unfamiliar to Paul and Barnabas. They discovered that they were about to be worshipped as the human incarnation of Zeus and Hermes. These pagans did not know the true God, and Paul and Barnabas argued worshiping them was wrong because they were mere men. Tearing off their clothes, they spoke to them and argued, saying worshiping them as God would oppose the very gospel that they were preaching. Paul and Barnabas finally convinced the crowd that they were not to be worshipped. But how quickly things change. Those who came with sacrifices and garlands now pressed upon Paul with stones. The reason for the sudden change in sentiment in the crowd seemed to be a result of two things. One, the Jews from Antioch and Iconium who had resisted and opposed Paul and Barnabas in their hometown now were in Lystra, and they were instigating stoning and trouble. Two, those leaders in Lystra who were leaders in the worship of Zeus realized, like the Jewish leaders, that now Paul and Barnabas were evangelizing for a competing religion that would wipe them out. So the crowd that once worshiped Paul now stoned him, leaving him for dead. The saints who believed gathered about him and got him up and took Paul back to Lystra. The next day, Paul and Barnabas left for Derbe, where they preached the gospel, and many came to the faith. It would have been so easy for Paul and Barnabas to simply continue to Syrian Antioch, Paul's home. Instead, they turned back around to the cities they had previously evangelized in, with the exception of Perga, which had not been on their first journey out. Paul and Barnabas returned to Lystra, Iconium, and Antioch to edify the churches that they had formed. On their return, they appointed elders in those churches, commending them to the Lord and encouraging them to stand fast in the Lord in the midst of persecution, which they taught them they should expect as a part of their Christian experience. Can you imagine joining a church where you know you are going to be persecuted? We see perseverance in the midst of those who would want to stop the work of God. The world we live in today is very divided, with people with different perspectives and different viewpoints, different religions. We sometimes have to tell our brothers that we must love even in the face of sin, even despite all the differences. These brothers, Paul and Barnabas, had to love even to the point of death. We sometimes, when we face our brothers that are different, that are in the midst of different challenges and different temptations, we sometimes throw up our hands in frustration, saying they will never learn. But Paul and Barnabas continued to persevere and to continue to serve God. There are days when our understanding of God's word will place us outside of the mainstream of the world, maybe even place us outside of the mainstream thinking of our churches. Our faith is a radical faith, and we too should expect persecution and those who would oppose what we're saying, because we are asked to love even when people treat us badly, even when we are being persecuted. We are asked to love even those who are different, those who act and walk in different ways. And we cannot shy away from our charge. That's the lesson for this week. Have a great week.